Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a fun topic to talk about because today we are actually going to be diving onto the other side of the platform, which it's funny because we all feel like we're therapists inside, right? I mean, being a hairstylist or a salon owner behind the chair, we get to deal with so many different types of personalities. We get to absorb a lot of emotional shock. So I'm really excited to bring my girlfriend, Megan Irwin, in today. She's a therapist and a social worker in Portland, Oregon. She specializes in supporting people healing from trauma, grief, and loss, attachment challenges, building healthy and fulfilling relationships, and navigating major life transitions. So I am really excited to have her here today. We've actually even done a class together, which I'm really excited to offer to you guys in the future. So we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. So I just want to open up the mic and welcome Megan.
Thank you. Hi, Ambrosia. I'm so excited to be here um, because I think you're right. Your listeners, people that work in the beauty industry, often are put in the position of therapist by default, and I know that takes a really big toll on you. So I'm just excited to get to be part of this conversation and share some of the things I know about how you all can protect yourselves from ingesting people's trauma all day.
Yes, protect us, Megan. Protect us from the storm, from the fire. Actually, I think this would be a good time for you to just share a little bit about your background and how you even became a therapist, because it is something for me personally, on my journey in the industry, I love to understand how people work and operate and what's the best way to communicate. I'm constantly learning more about myself through it. So I'd love to hear about your background in becoming a therapist.
Sure. So, working as a therapist and a social worker is actually my third career. But there's a thread that connects it all, and that thread is people's stories and a sense of curiosity about why people do the things they do, and questions I've always had about how we can change the world around us and change ourselves to be better. So, I actually started my career as a journalist. I was an investigative reporter at a newspaper down in Phoenix. And I focused a lot on stories about things that were going wrong in the system. So I wrote a lot about immigration at a time where the immigration issue in Arizona had reached a real boiling point. I wrote a lot about adults with developmental disabilities and the way that they were mistreated by the system. I loved that job, but it burned me out because I was taking in other people's trauma all day long without any place to put it. And I just got really frustrated at just telling people's stories and not being able to actually feel like I was helping them at all. So I moved to Oregon in 2008 with every intention of going to law school, and started working in policy and politics while I was here, or when I first got here. Got into law school, decided I actually didn't want to be a lawyer. I really liked doing public policy work. I worked in education policy and education politics locally and across the country, and eventually found myself working for the governor here in Oregon, running a state agency focused on early childhood education policy, early childhood programs. And I loved it. I thought it was my dream job. I had so much fun working with people inside the state agency and people out in community to try and find solutions to these really big social problems. Like, how do we support parents so that they don't pass on generational cycles of trauma to their kids? How do we make childcare more affordable and higher quality and more accessible to families? I loved it until I stopped loving it. And I stopped loving it for a couple of reasons. One, I had no boundaries in that job, which is something we'll talk about later. And I let myself get completely burned out. I reached a point of burnout where I just actually could not keep going in that work because of my lack of boundaries. And also through that work, I was spending so much time with people out in community, learning about them and learning about their problems. And I just kept bumping up against the ways that people are traumatized and how hard it is to heal those wounds and the lack of access to really good therapeutic supports. And so I got really curious about how do we actually heal from mental health challenges? How do we heal from trauma? How do we interrupt those cycles? And that led me to go to graduate school to get my master's of social work and become a therapist. So there's kind of a thread that connects it all, but I'm definitely someone that has bounced around a little bit until I found the place I really wanted to land and found what is really truly, I think, my life's purpose.
Well, that just segues me right into my next question, which you just brought up with mental health. I love that your story kind of took you here, which honestly, it surprised me the first time I heard that. I was like, wait, how do these connect? Because when you first started telling the story, I was like, working for the governor, what? you know? And then just learning this about, but now it makes sense to me. So when it comes to matters of mental health, what are some of the most common roadblocks that you see happen that kind of come up for you?
Yeah, I love this question. And I think that there's three different kinds of roadblocks that come up. And if we start at the personal, at the individual, and then go big, that's probably the best way to think about it. But on an individual level, it's really emotional and scary to realize that your life is not how you want it to be, that your life is not what you envisioned for yourself, or that you're struggling. That's a really scary emotional point to reach. And I think that there's stigma around needing support for mental health. And people can often feel broken, quote unquote, or ashamed that they need more support. Um, because as a society, we don't think about taking care of our mental health, taking care of our hearts and our spirits as something that is just done as part of like a wellness routine. We don't think about mental health preventative care. So usually people don't start focusing on it until they've reached a point of crisis. And then there's a lot of shame and stigma that internalized shame and stigma that can come from that. And the other thing is just on the individual level, people that have been through a lot in their lives often feel that it might be too scary to face or to open up about because even though present day might kind of suck because of the past, it's the devil you know. Like you know how to survive in the life you're in. What happens when you start opening up old wounds? Is it going to be worse? I promise anybody listening, it might be worse at first because you're like lancing the wound, but it leads to better long term. So there's kind of those individual like mental blocks that people have, and then I just think there's a lot of societal barriers, right? We live in a society that's super reactive. We only react to like a crisis. We don't have a culture that values prevention or proactively managing our mental health. So by the time people start to seek help, it's the emotional equivalent of like a heart attack,
So true.
because we just don't have a culture that says it's okay to need help and it's actually best to get support to start working on yourself before you're in crisis. Um, and then, on a practical level, finding a therapist is hard, it's expensive. The way that insurance pays for mental health support is pretty backwards. So there's a lot of practical barriers that get in folks' way. But I mean, my big soapbox around this is that we just need to work to start to normalize just routine daily maintenance of our mental health and make time for our emotional well-being the same way that we've been taught to make time for exercise and taking care of our physical bodies. Um, Otherwise, we're going to just stay in this place where we think of working on our mental health or our emotional wellness as something you only do in a crisis. And it's just such a backwards way of doing it.
Totally. Thank goodness for your voice just to even speak about the mental health preventative care because you're right. I think, we live in a society that's continually placing us in a place where we have to or we should be perfect virtually. Like we have to have it all figured out. And if we don't, something is wrong with us, something is broken. It makes people uncomfortable and they get a little shifty in their pants about it. And it continues to encourage that cycle that you can't be normal. Like, and that is normal. Like this is a part of being normal that has not been normalized yet. So I'm grateful that you're even here to be a voice of authority to say that this is absolutely normal, and it's something that's necessary to talk about. I feel that we're with our industry, especially being a hairstylist, in the salon, taking care of clients all the time, it's really hard to create a healthy mental space that we can divide ourselves from the workspace separately and not get personally involved or not feel personally attacked or not, if we ruffle someone's feathers, how can it not affect us when we get home? And how can we not absorb these things as personal? So I would love to hear from you just any advice that you have for those who are listening who have a hard time with creating healthy mental space for themselves in a workplace.
Absolutely. So, the first thing I want to acknowledge is it's true that there are some truly toxic workplaces out there. And if you're listening to this and you're in a place where you're being bullied or blamed for things you're not doing or scapegoated by your boss constantly, that is a truly toxic work environment. It's basically an abusive relationship. And there are the things I'm going to say around how to cultivate like healthy mental balance in the workplace will help you, but nothing will help you more than believing in yourself enough to move to a healthier workplace where you're valued. So I just want to acknowledge that, because it's true that there's folks out there that are just trying to make a bad thing work and it's never going to. And you can set boundaries all you want. If you're in an abusive work relationship, you got to find help to get out of it. So that's my caveat around all of this. That being said, most of us are not in a workplace like that. Most of us work in places where the people are nice enough. We're not being bullied. Maybe we're kind of overworked. Maybe we're a little bit over it with clients. Tired of workplace politics. That's all normal stuff. And those are things that you really do have within you the ability to put some controls around. So, the number one thing I recommend it for people that are struggling to find like a happy balance at work is to really look at what your boundaries are at work. I love a boundary. It's my favorite thing to talk about. And look at where
I love that you're talking about it.
yeah, and look at where they need a reset. And my first question to clients that are struggling with this is to ask, do you even know what boundaries are? Do you even have like a baseline understanding of what a boundary is? And do you have any? That's kind of the starting point, because a lot of people, right, especially people who are socialized as women, we're taught that it's our responsibility to make everybody else around us happy at the expense of our own well being. And that's for sure true in customer service jobs. Like, I'm sure that you've experienced that feeling at some point, right?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely. Most definitely. I think it's probably the number one, I guess, roadblock that we kind of face on a continual basis. We'd rather make ourselves uncomfortable than make someone else uncomfortable for sure.
Totally. And of course, like in a customer facing job, you do need to do your best to have good customer service, but that doesn't have to equal taking abuse from people or not having any boundaries around what you will and won't do. And a lot of people I find are afraid of boundaries or think that having boundaries means saying no to everything, or they equate it with being rude. But a different perspective on it that I would offer is that having boundaries is a really beautiful way to care about yourself and care about others. Um, because when your needs are well defined and communicated well, you can show up for other people as your fullest and best self. And people that have healthy boundaries, like they can definitely say no when they need to, and they're also comfortable saying yes when they want to. They feel good about the things they say yes to, and they actually open themselves up to more intimacy, better relationships, better client relationships, because they're not walking around with a whole bunch of resentment all the time. So, number one tip is to figure out if you have any boundaries at all at work, and if not, where do you need to set some? And if you're unsure where to start, I would take some time. I would start by just taking some time to try and like mindfully notice, take a mindful inventory of where in your workday do you find yourself feeling the most resentful? Where do you feel the most irritated? That usually means that a boundary needs to be set around something. It's a clue because people with strong boundaries don't feel resentful at work because they're not being overextended. Their needs are being met so that they can provide for their coworkers, their clients, whoever. So that's my first kind of tip around that. And then the second thing that I would offer to people who are struggling with a healthy mindset at work is to cultivate a life outside of work, right? We really, in this culture, we get into hustle culture, and our entire sense of self, our entire identity becomes our job. And so if things aren't going well at work and you don't have anything else interesting going on in your life, it's really easy to get into that downward spiral.
I'm so glad you spoke to that because I do feel like there is a lot of praise that goes into the hustle. And that is something that I would love in my lifetime to at least witness breakthroughs to kind of get through that. I mean, there's something to be said about not just setting those boundaries and living by them, but also just creating a space for yourself to enjoy your life and find that better balance. I mean, we always talk about balance, but it's like, I know it's not something that you just achieve right away. It's something that we're constantly having to work toward, but you can't work towards something like that if you're not able to kind of get control of those other types of things. So I feel like with this topic, at least, and I know boundaries that could be, we could talk for hours about boundaries. And you know me, I love a good list. I do. I love a good list. So I love that you just gave two pieces of advice. Do you have any other, I guess, if you could create a list, so to speak, for our listeners that are trying to implement right away into the routine to create a better mental space and just being able to find a better footing with that? What would some of those things be? I mean, I know that we're setting boundaries is huge for us, and then cultivating a life outside of work is another big thing. What else would you say, kind of piggybacking off of that?
Yeah, I love this question. And I do have a list for you.
Yay, give me the goods.
The first thing on my list for people that are wanting to improve their mental health, improve the way they're feeling about things in their life, is to actually spend some time to figure out your core values. Ambrosia knows this. Core values and boundaries are two things I talk about all the time. But the reason to really understand what you value is that you can use that as your decision making compass to guide you through your life. And if you don't know your core values, then I guarantee you are completely disconnected from yourself. And disconnection from self is a recipe for feeling unhappy, dissatisfied, confused, adrift, grumpy, all of it. So the first step, or one thing that I really strongly recommend everyone do, is take some time to cultivate an understanding of your core values. There are fabulous resources online to help folks do that. Like, really, if you just put core values clarification into Google, you will find so much guidance. And it's an excellent journaling prompt. It's something to really sit with in order to start to feel more connected to yourself. The second thing, like I said, is really truly you need a life outside of work. You have to cultivate other domains of wellness. There are actually like 5 or 6 domains of wellness that we talk about a lot in the mental health community. And occupational wellness work is certainly one of those things. But we also talk about emotional wellness. So, awareness of your thoughts and feelings, being able to express them, physical wellness, taking care of your body. And I don't mean dieting or working out like crazy. I mean, really, truly just being in tune enough with your physical body that you know what feels good. Spiritual wellness. I don't mean going to church. Go to church if that's your jam, but spiritual wellness is just being connected to something bigger than yourself. We need that as human beings. It brings meaning to our life. And then, of course, we need also like strong social relationships, family, friends, partners, like really cultivating those relationships. And it's hard to have all domains of wellness balanced with each other at all times. But my point here is really for people to think about, if you're overextended at work and your whole identity is tied up in work, where could you put a little bit more time and attention and just like pick one domain? Maybe you say, I'm really busy at work and I want to make an intentional practice of connecting with my spiritual self, start cultivating a spiritual life outside of work. Like, you can pick one, but you've got to have something going on besides work. And then my last three are honestly so simple, but so hard at the same time. Take 10 minutes a day to go outside. Human beings are not meant to be inside as hunched over computers, or inside hunched over people's heads, cutting their hair all day, every day. Take just 10 minutes a day. Find a spot that you like that's outside, a tree, a rose bush, whatever it is, and spend 10 minutes a day just reflecting on that, just existing. Breathe in the air, notice how it feels. Let yourself get outside. It's so simple. It's hard to convince yourself to make that time. For some folks, it's so simple, but it really, really helps fill your cup a little bit. The next one is sleep. None of us are getting enough. We all need better sleep hygiene. Figure out how to sleep. We cannot integrate our day. We cannot recover from chronic stress if we're not sleeping well. Our brains need that time. And then the final thing, I always suggest to people to learn at least one grounding exercise for when you're really, really triggered and overly stressed out. It can be as simple as learning how to truly do really good deep breathing at a soothing cadence, or more complicated than that. There's a whole bunch of grounding exercises that we could teach people. There's a lot available online, but truly, like, learn one, find one that you really like and practice it and stick to it to just soothe your nervous system when you're stressed out at work. Many of them take no more than like 5 minutes, and it gives you a complete neurological reset. So that's my list of things, from kind of more complicated, like figure out your values and just create an interesting life outside of work, all the way down to learn one grounding exercise for when you're stressed out and use it.
You know what I learned through you, Megan, a while back when we were actually teaching a class together and you were talking about core values, is to really evaluate where I find, I guess, my peace, or where I feel, you said earlier, like, where do you feel most resentful? And I did notice that the places that you find where that resentment is coming from is getting away from those core values. And I didn't really understand it at the time. But when you do those exercises to revisit where those core values might live, then it also helps to integrate a healthier relationship between you and your clients, between even you and your spouse, you and your kids. I mean, there's so much that it spills into, without really, it was something that I wasn't fully aware of it at the time. But then when I actually started doing the exercises, learning and growing more and developing with that, and even just asking others who were close to me, and I realized that a lot of us aligned closely to the same core values, it helped me with realizing, or at least just making better decisions, making better choices. Because if you just go back to that and you revisit that question, like, does this align with my core values? And it's just a yes or no question. And it makes it so much easier to make a decision from there. It's easier to say yes or no when it does or doesn't align with something. So thank you so much for breaking down those top 5 pieces and making them really clean and easy to follow. Because sometimes, I mean, you can dive real deep, right? Like Alice in Wonderland down the whole deep. So, and that's probably something I know for a fact I'm going to want to have you come back for more components of those, because I know that we can all we can all start to understand a little bit more the complexities of this, and just how to bring things to the surface to simplify it. And with your guidance, it really helps uh, understand these things with a little more clarity, and to, like, bring us back to the beginning, just normalizing this and just understanding that these are normal feelings, thoughts, behaviors that lead into our daily lives and can kind of erupt different things that kind of come from underneath us or from within us that we weren't really aware of. So I know that we mentioned that like this class that you recently taught with Successful Stylist Academy, where you focus on burnout. Can we revisit that just really quickly? I would love it if you can just share a little bit about what actually happens when we feel burnout and what can we do to avoid that.
Yes. So burnout is stress, usually work related stress, that has gone to the absolute extreme. Burnout is caused by chronic activation of your stress response. So basically, without getting too technical, your brain is constantly flooded with the hormone cortisol, which is like the alert system for our brains that lets us know that we're stressed out, lets us know we're in danger, triggers a whole bunch of different kinds of responses like fight, flight, freeze. You've probably heard that before. People become burned out when that stress response system is chronically activated. And when that chronic activation happens, every time those flashpoints go off, it's harder and harder to recover and bounce back. Our bodies are built to handle and bounce back from stress, but if it's chronically flooding, if your system's chronically flooded, you don't have any refractory period, you don't have any time to bounce back. And then we get to burnout. And, I think it's really good to know the signs and symptoms of burnout. I won't go through every single one because it's a long list, but there's the obvious ones like dreading going to work and feeling like really low energy and really tired. There's other signs, though, that you're burnt out that are a little bit more subtle. So, feeling overly critical toward yourself and toward others, feeling unrecognized for your work and really resentful of the people around you, feeling unusual amounts of shame for making a mistake, like making a mistake and thinking about it for weeks and not being able to just bounce back resiliently from making a mistake. These are signs that you've entered burnout. And so when we reach this point, the only way out of it is to find a way to give your nervous system a reset. And that means that things have to come off your plate. If you don't have boundaries, you need to get some in place really quick. And I say that like it's easy. I know it's not. Get some help to figure out how to do that, but you have got to get to a place where your nervous system can have a reset. Slowing down is essential. The chronic flooding of your brain with stress has to stop. And when you reach this point, it can be hard to see this, but working harder, working more, stressing yourself out more is not going to solve the problem. It's just making it worse. And so if you've reached burnout, I mean, my best recommendation is if you're in a workplace where you have a boss that you can trust and talk to talk about what can come off your plate for a time so that you can recover. Use your PTO, use your sick time. Think about it as if you had a physical injury that you need to take some time off work to recover for. And if you can give yourself that time and get that sort of nervous system reset, you'll come back as your true self again. I think a lot of time people worry about like lost work time, lost productivity, but the truth is if you're burned out, you're not working to your best abilities, and your production is probably really low because you're resentful, exhausted, don't want to be there, etc. So I know it's hard to do again in this like hustle and grind culture, but if you're burned out, you really need to find a way to stop that chronic stress activation and get some rest. And a good therapist can help you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I feel like I just got like a personalized therapy session with you, Megan. Like, I feel like you were speaking completely to my soul. Like, I was like, yes, yes, yep, that too. And oh my gosh, yes. So, thank you for even saying that because I will say, as I've gotten a little bit older and I've like matured through the seasons of my life, I would say, I've definitely gotten a little bit better about being able to kind of shut things down and know, like, I got to call this a day and tomorrow I can pick this right back up because it, it really is. It's true. You can't be efficiently productive doing this when you're feeling that way. And the last thing you want to do is resent something that it, is supposed to light you up and excite you. And I mean, what fun is life if you just let that happen to you? And we have absolute control over it. We can have control over it. I know. And like what Megan's saying, it's so much easier said than done. And that's the reason why she has a job. That's the reason why we need people like her. But it's also a translation into what we do, right? I mean, like, I made that very beginning joke, that joke at the very beginning where I said, it's like we're therapists, but we have to remind ourselves of those things too. Just being able to normalize these types of things and not beat ourselves up, and to be able to set those boundaries for ourselves. I said that because it's easy to say, like, yes, set boundaries for others, but we have to make sure that we instate boundaries for ourselves as well. And I think that's huge. I actually think that we need to have Megan back here just to talk about boundaries alone, because it's something very relevant in our culture today. And it's something that I feel like, as we are maneuvering through the changes in our lives, the changes in our workspaces, we're going to have to get even more solid about setting those boundaries. They're going to become even more important, because this is not something you can just escape. You can't just pile work on yourself and expect that it's just going to go away. It's not something you can just shove into a closet. So, um, I want to just close this off with the one last final thought from Megan, and I want to hear, just give you the floor, Megan. Please tell us one last final thought for the night before we close down, and where can we find you, and what's coming up for you? What's next in your world?
Sure. So I want to just reiterate what you said, which is all of this is easier said than done, of course. So I really don't want people to listen to this and then beat themselves up or stress themselves out like that they aren't doing these things right now. Pick one thing you want to work on and just start with that one thing for a month. Don't add anything else. Just pick one mental wellness practice and stick to it the best you can. Um, for folks that might be listening who have reached a point truly of total burnout, or they're just really going through it, I do suggest seeking out some support. That can be in the form of a therapist, that can be in the form of a coach. I think that coaching relationships can be just as powerful as the therapeutic relationship in many instances, especially there's coaches out there that focus on burnout, that focus on stress resilience. Just find somebody that can be in your corner to help you navigate if you're really at a point where everything is bleak every day. There's people that really want to help you. And it is possible. You just take small steps toward the life that you want. You have within you everything you need to live a self determined life. It's possible no matter what your past history or present moment is like. I just really want folks to hear. I know it sounds like a platitude, but I spend hours a week with people that have been through some of the worst traumas you can imagine. And I watch them grow and come out of it and grow into themselves. And it's possible. There is totally hope here, even when it feels like there isn't. So I think that's my kind of closing thought for your listeners. And then in terms of where folks can find me, soon you and I will have a class available for people on all of these topics, going much more in depth into values, boundaries, self-care, self-compassion, all the good stuff we've been talking about. So everyone listening should keep an eye out for that. I have a podcast with my bestie. Her name's Raina. Our podcast is called Shh, Don't Talk About It. And we focus on talking about difficult subjects that society tells us we're not supposed to talk about. And sometimes it gets pretty serious, but we bring a lot of humor into it as well. And it's a place to just go to, like, relax, have a beer with us, have a claw with us, and hear us talk about things that a lot of people are silenced around. And then I am a therapist here in the Portland area in private practice, and folks can get more information on that if they're interested at my website, which is just meganirwincounseling.com.
You guys will find all the information and more in the show notes. And I'm really excited to share with you a little bit more about the deeper subject that kind of goes into depth with what we just talked about today. So thank you once again, Megan, for joining us. The value that you give is so gratefully needed. And I am just so thankful that you take your time out after spending your entire day with other people that you are here today just to talk about this very subject. So thank you once again. And make sure you guys hang out with us next week as well for episode 19 with Zoe Carpenter. We're going to be getting into a little bit more into the hair industry as well. We're going to talk about elevating your blonding business. We all need to do a little bit more of that as well. So take care, guys, and we will be seeing you next week.